His shoes were still squeaking on the damn polished concrete when I saw the notification pop up on the company Slack. Welcome, Blake. Party popper. Like we'd just onboarded a barista, not the CEO's overcooked son with a finance degree from an online school, and the impulse control of a wet ferret. He waltzed in with a backwards hat, a collagen smoothie, and a Bluetooth speaker blaring something that did not scream fiduciary responsibility. I hadn't even logged my first compliance note of the day when someone pinged me a link from Instagram. Public post. Office geotagged. There he was, grinning like a frat king who just snorted a bonus, parked in my chair. My contract-bound, non-transferable, governance-protected desk. Caption. Finally running this place. It was almost art, how fast I stopped breathing. Not out of panic. Out of absolute, surgical clarity. I took the screenshot, timestamped it with our internal doc tracker, then opened Outlook and typed 6 words to legal. Per clause 7, he just voided the agreement. Hit send. Then I leaned back and sipped my coffee like I hadn't just fired a torpedo straight through the hull. By the way, if you're listening and haven't hit subscribe yet, please do. 97% of people don't, but it really helps this channel, and our caffeine supply, stay alive. Hit like too. It means more than you think to the team behind this. Blake had no idea what that desk meant. No one outside legal and the board did. It wasn't just furniture. It was an anchor, part of a transition governance clause baked into a panic-era restructuring agreement from 2012. Long story short, they couldn't legally remove, relocate, or reassign me, or any of my operational tools, without full board approval and my signed consent. It was a poison pill, disguised in legalese and fine print, and that desk was the trigger. Blake kicked it off with a selfie. He spent the next few hours acting like an influencer on unpaid rent, rolled a whiteboard into the main corridor and wrote Blakenation across it in red Sharpie, told the analytics team he wanted to inject dopamine into the dashboards. His second public post was him flexing a mug that said best CEO ever. Even though he wasn't actually CEO, his dad was still technically holding that seat during transition. Didn't stop Blake from signing off emails with Chief Visionary Officer. Meanwhile, legal? Full DEFCON mode. One paralegal called me from the file archive room, breathless, and asked if I had a copy of the red folder. That's how they referred to it. Transition agreement, protected class executives. I hadn't seen it in years, but I didn't need to. I had memorized Clause 7 the way some people memorize their wedding vows. Section 7.3 Line 4. Any act of material displacement of protected executive property, access or role, absent written consent and board majority, will render null and void any non-executive protections currently insulating standing leadership from structural review. Translation? If Blake even breathed near that office with intent, the entire executive safety net, including his father's, was toast. I walked past his brainstorming session that afternoon. He had HR interns mood boarding what he called brand chaos. I heard the word disruptify 3 times before I ducked back into my suite. It smelled different. He'd moved my chair back half an inch, shifted my keyboard, sat in a seat he wasn't allowed to look at without setting off a governance chain reaction that would trigger every compliance tripwire we'd buried over the last decade. And he did it smiling. So I waited. Not for an apology. Not even an acknowledgement. I waited for the silence to crawl up the corporate grapevine and find the board's inbox. It didn't take long. By 4:17 p.m., someone from institutional oversight pinged me on Signal. Did you consent to that? I sent a thumbs down emoji and nothing else. The bomb was already ticking. And Blake? Still smiling like a jackass, still thinking this was his kingdom now. He had no idea that desk was a loaded gun pointed straight at his father's legacy. And he'd just pulled the trigger for me. By 9:11 the next morning, legal looked like they were prepping for war crimes tribunal. No smiles. No holguavanter. Just urgent shuffling, closed doors, and a steady stream of caffeine orders that could have fueled an entire WeWork. One of the junior counsels bolted across the mezzanine with a stack of printouts, so high it should have come with a seatbelt. Another guy from contracts muttered, "She warned them," under his breath and kept walking like a ghost was following him. Then they opened the vault. You think I'm being dramatic? I'm not. There's a file cabinet on sublevel 2 with biometric locks. Barely used. It holds 6 folders. 6. I know because I helped build 3 of them. That morning they pulled folder number 4. Transition Agreement. Protected Class Executives. Bright red tab. Dust on the corners. Signed into existence 12 years ago during a crisis. No one likes to remember, and nobody dares to unwind. When things almost fell apart back then, imploding revenue, an FTC breathing down our neck, 3 founders suing each other like toddlers fighting over Legos, we rewrote the rules to survive. The board authorized transitional keystones. Legalese for human firewalls. People who couldn't be touched without a surgical process, because removing them meant destabilizing the very contracts that kept the company from going thermonuclear. I was one of them. Not by title, by contract. And that desk? That wasn't just where I kept my spreadsheets and stress ball collection. It was an access control point. A material asset of a protected class executive. Touch it wrong, and the whole illusion of untouchable leadership started to rot from the inside out. They knew it. Legal always knew it. That's why compliance head Jenna Collins, sharp, bitter, never missed a clause, looked pale as aspirin when she laid the folder open in the executive briefing room and read it aloud like she was reciting a last will. Clause 7. Any act of material displacement, without board majority and written consent, invalidates all non-executive protections during the transitional enforcement term. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Silence settled like concrete. Then the room erupted. Half whispers, half gasps, a few panic-hissed curses from the back. One exec stammered. You mean it applies retroactively? Jenna just nodded, jaw tight, eyes narrowed. The clause has no expiration language. It's perpetual until formally sunset, which it never was. The CEO's executive assistant, Rhonda, sweet, overworked, loyal to a fault, was sent to grab Blake. She didn't even make it out the door before Jenna stopped her. No. Let him post one more thing. We need documented pattern. The trap was set. Let the fool keep walking. Every step he took was one less excuse the board could make. Blake, of course, was still strutting through departments like a kid at Build-A-Bear, calling himself Chief Vibes Architect, and handing out energy drink samples to the IT department. He installed a Nerf hoop in the data compliance wing. Used my nameplate as a coaster. Still completely oblivious that his frat boy theater had triggered a death spiral in executive protections that now had outside counsel circling like sharks with blood in the water. Somewhere between lunch and whatever influencer call he disappeared into, the whispers began. A junior board member had seen the post. Screenshotted it. Sent it to a rep from an institutional investor. The kind that doesn't play games. The kind that audits CEO behavior like it's currency. And all the while, I sat in conference 3C across the glass wall from legal, watching their hands move faster, their voices drop lower, the red folder open wider. This wasn't just about a desk. It never was. This was about a foundation Blake had just jackhammered through without understanding that it held up everything his daddy built. Every clause, every exemption, every ounce of board immunity, hinged on a structure Blake had now made invalid. With a selfie, the walls hadn't crumbled yet, but I could hear the first hairline fractures echoing through the marble. The quarterly update call started like all the others. Scripted pleasantries, recycled metrics, a few over-engineered slide transitions from marketing to make flat numbers look like a fireworks finale. But something was off. Too quiet. Not the good kind of quiet. The kind that builds right before a courtroom verdict or the moment before a storm peels your roof off. I was dialed in from my satellite office. A room they never revoked access to, because revoking it would have triggered yet another clause. And as the Zoom squares populated with the usual suspects, I could see it in their faces. Nobody was looking at the speaker. They were looking at each other. Or more precisely, at their phones. Thumbs were moving. I know that posture. That downward glance. It's not engagement. It's emergency triangulation. I took a screenshot of the gallery view. 10 board members. 8 of them visibly texting under the table. The other 2 staring straight ahead like statues, trying not to breathe too loud. Words started drifting into the conversation like broken glass under the door. exposure, breach, clause risk, proxy vulnerability. The CFO, who usually narrates his slides like he's reading bedtime stories to investors, started stumbling. By slide 3, he skipped straight to the summary. By slide 5, the chair interrupted and asked for a moment to realign. That was the moment it went silent. Behind the curtain, texts were flying. The junior board member from TechVest, barely 34, new appointment, loves process over politics, had already sent Blake's desk selfie to their institutional compliance rep. Didn't ask permission. Didn't wait for red tape. Just sent it with the subject line, governance conflict. Immediate eyes. And once it hits them, that's not internal drama anymore. That's oxygen to a fire inside a $700 million powder keg of quarterly expectations, fiduciary strings, and IPO whispers that were already too delicate to touch. You think HR nightmares make noise? Try telling an institutional investor that your CEO's son just voided a governance framework with an iPhone and an ego trip. I got the alert on my second device. Flagged. Corporate governance exception. External party inquiry received. It pinged from our legal risk dashboard, a little system I helped build years ago for exactly this kind of wildfire. I leaned back and stared at it for a long time. No joy. No grin. Just that cold pulse of vindication that comes when the walls you've spent a career holding up start collapsing exactly where you warned they would. And Blake? Oh, Blake was in a beanbag chair somewhere on the 7th floor, giving a fireside chat to the UX interns about emotional disruption as strategy. Someone DM'd me a clip. He actually used the phrase nonlinear org karma. There were bongo drums in the background. I wish I were joking. Meanwhile, the board was split into factions. The veterans whispering about liability insurance. The new blood talking fast about personal indemnification. The realists counting how many hours they had before the investors scheduled a formal inquiry. By the 30-minute mark, the board chair's face had gone gray. He asked to end the call early, to reformat data alignment before publishing. That's code for, we're in deep shit and have no clue who to blame first. I stayed on the line after everyone dropped. Just me and the corporate logo. No noise. No camera. Just the faint hum of systems recalibrating and the knowledge that, for the first time in 5 years, everybody at the top was whispering in my direction again. Not to ask me to fix it. Not yet. But to ask the only question that mattered now. How much of this had I seen coming? Answer? All of it. I just let Blake hit the gas. All I did was move my foot off the brake. The beauty of collapse is it never starts with a scream. It starts with a whisper. A comma out of place. A form filed 10 minutes too late. An email sent from the wrong domain. And Blake? Oh, he was a walking buffet of minor infractions with major implications. All I had to do was open my inbox and let the breadcrumbs fall. It started with a memo titled, New Vision, New Voice, Acting COO Priorities. Sent, 9:43 a.m. From blake.ceo@ourcompany.ai. To all staff. The subject line was already a crime against structure. The signature line, Blake Turner, Acting COO, was a gift wrapped in negligence. Acting so. Not interim. Not proposed. Not pending. He was declaring an operational title he had no legal authority to wield, within a company where titles don't just appear. They cascade down from layered approvals, board votes, and archive compliance logs. Blake had none of it. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to my private inbox. Then to Jenna in legal with the subject. Clause 7, Supplemental Evidence. I didn't add commentary. I didn't need to. The clause spoke louder than I ever could. Then came the purchase orders. Marketing invoices signed with a digital stamp traced back to Blake's temporary credentials. $14,700 for brand culture reactivation. A VR onboarding experience, quote from an agency that doesn't even appear on our vendor compliance list. Blake's name was all over them, initials, forward tags, approval trails. And yet, he didn't have the credentials to authorize a refill on the office coffee budget, let alone six-figure spend commitments. Every one of those sign-offs was an unauthorized act of material financial direction, a violation under at least 2 federal standards, and 3 internal ones. The dam wasn't just cracking. It was hissing now. I sent those too. BCC'd, timestamped, forwarded to the clause custodians buried inside legal. They knew what I was doing. Not officially, of course. But unofficially? They were starving for documentation. Everyone knew what the sun was. But no one wanted to be the first to draw blood. That's where I came in. Not with a sword. With receipts. And I wasn't alone. It started subtly, an internal screen grab from a Slack channel I wasn't in anymore. Blake using executive override to bypass a deployment schedule in engineering. That file didn't come from me. It came from a blank email. No name. No body. Just an attachment, labeled timestamped. Then another. A forwarded calendar invite showing Blake inserting himself into a vendor renegotiation call listed as private. COO only. The sender's name? no.sender@securemail.net. I checked the metadata. It came from inside the company. I wasn't just building a paper trail. I had a quiet accomplice. Maybe more than one. Someone still inside. Someone watching him as closely as I was. Someone who knew exactly which threads to pull and which ones to feed to me. Not out of loyalty. Not out of friendship. Out of shared interest. Blake was a threat to the very scaffolding that kept us standing. By week's end, I had 13 violations logged. 6 in financial decision-making. 3 in access breaches. 4 in compliance messaging language. None of them dramatic. All of them damning. One file in particular I labeled Strike Point. It was a voice memo Blake recorded and shared with his innovation circle. Said, and I quote, "I don't care what the old frameworks say. If I'm sitting in the COO chair, I am the framework now." Perfect. Arrogance on tape. Intent in his own words. All I needed was one more escalation, a trigger moment. A procedural overstep that even the board couldn't walk back without bleeding on their own shoes. So I waited. And while I waited, I kept feeding the fire. Not to burn the place down. To smoke them out. They flew her in from Chicago. First-class ticket, private car from the airport, full security clearance waiting at the front desk. Outside counsel doesn't usually get that kind of treatment unless something's bleeding internally. And we were hemorrhaging. Her name was Ruth Delgado, partner at a firm known for killing mergers and salvaging IPOs by tearing boards limb from limb. I'd crossed paths with her once, back when we were negotiating compliance sunset clauses for our Asia expansion. Sharp, humorless, devastatingly efficient. The kind of woman who didn't blink unless there was something in her eye or blood on a contract. She didn't ask for coffee when she sat down. She asked for the red folder. Not a copy. The original. Jenna handed it over like it was evidence in a criminal trial. Ruth laid out each page, scanning like she already knew the ending and was just confirming the path there. When she hit clause 7, she paused. Adjusted her glasses. Reread it twice. Then she looked up and said quietly, too quietly, "If he never consented, this entire structure collapses." Silence. Then one of the board members, a venture guy from the coast who still thinks Patagonia vests count as formal wear, muttered, "Well, surely there was some kind of HR transition form, right?" That's when the CEO stepped in. "It's a misunderstanding," he said, fake smile welded to his face like a bad facelift. "Just a delay in HR processing. We were going to formalize the transition with a written memo next quarter. My son was just enthusiastic." Enthusiastic? That jackass posted 6 more CEO chronicles to Instagram this week, including one where he poured a bottle of champagne over a whiteboard labeled, "Old guard equals dead weight." "We have intent," the CEO added, desperation creeping into the corners of his voice. "Intent to formalize." Ruth didn't flinch. Intent doesn't override clause language. You cannot wish away legal structure. Not at this level. Not with this much investor exposure. That's when the son joined the call. Video on, sunglasses indoors, a hoodie that looked like it cost more than my first car. He sat in what looked like the marketing suite, feet up, sipping something pink from a metal straw. Someone had clearly texted him mid-meeting, because he clicked in hot and smug. Hey, he grinned. "So, just catching up here. Are we freaking out over some paperwork? Come on, people. I'm running this thing anyway. That was it. You could hear the air leave the room. Not just from legal, from the board. Ruth stared at the screen like she was witnessing a war crime in real time. One of the board members actually coughed, then turned off his camera. Another one, quiet old Mr. Halpern who never speaks unless the company's stock dips below $12, leaned forward and said flatly, "We need to discuss a vote." The CEO's neck turned a shade of red I haven't seen outside of heatstroke. Ruth clicked her pen, leaned forward and said, "Given the evidence presented and the language of Clause 7, any continued occupancy or assumed title by Mr. Turner Jr. constitutes an ongoing governance breach." Translation: every second Blake sat in that seat, he was nuking their liability coverage, their executive immunity, and possibly their investor protections. The chair finally spoke. "Then we propose a temporary suspension, pending review and internal audit. All in favor?" 5 hands went up. 2 abstained. 1 was already gone from the call. I didn't raise mine. I didn't need to. I wasn't voting. I was watching. Blake just smirked and logged off, muttering something about haters and vibes. But I could see it in their eyes now. The panic was no longer abstract. It had form. It had a clause. It had a paper trail with my name at the center. And no one, not the CEO, not his son, not even the damn chair, could explain how they'd allowed it to go this far. That's because they didn't allow it. They ignored it. And I never said a word. I just kept the receipts. The call was labeled private, Tier 1 stakeholders only, but when I logged in, my credentials sailed through without resistance. That told me everything. I wasn't a guest anymore. I was evidence. The room was virtual, but the tension was thick enough to chew. 10 black-suited investors, all with backgrounds blurred, one from his jet, another from what looked like an oak-paneled office in London, and a third from a beachside compound I'd bet half a bonus was off books. These weren't retail players. These were institutional whales. The ones who didn't ask for performance reports, they asked for explanations when the numbers smelled off. The lead voice came from Martin Ainsley, board rep for Norel Capital. Quiet British menace with an allergy to inefficiency. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His first sentence cut like a bone saw. "We received a whistleblower notification this week. Something about the invalidation of a protected executive clause. Is that true?" The CEO cleared his throat. "Already sweating. Already sinking. There's been some confusion, yes, but we're in the process of clarifying transition authority." Martin interrupted. "Let's try this again, Mark. Why was a protected transitional executive displaced without consent?" You could hear the CEO's soul leave his body. There was no intent to displace. This was an internal reshuffling that may have looked like. I clicked share screen. 1 click. 1 window. The contract appeared. Hi-res. Full page. Transitional Executive Protection Agreement, across the top. Clause 7 highlighted. My signature. Their signatures. Their timestamps. And in the top right corner, the words they'd prayed I'd never show in a room like this. Status, still active. No expiration. No amendment. No asterisk. Nothing. I zoomed in on the clause itself. The legal text danced across their screens like a courtroom hammer. Any act of displacement, material, symbolic, or procedural, absent written consent and board majority invalidates all non-executive protections and triggers immediate structural review of executive disbursements during the affected term. Martin leaned forward. "Thank you," he said, nodding politely at me like I'd just presented a weather report. Then he turned back to the CEO. "So let's do the math, shall we? Your son occupied the executive suite. Without consent. That violates Clause 7, which, as written, mandates a review of all executive bonuses and protections during the impacted term." Someone else on the call chuckled. Not a happy laugh. More like the sound a lion makes when it corners a limping deer. "Would you say," Martin asked calmly, "that your 2022 disbursement of $1.4 million in discretionary bonuses, including your own, was made during this impacted term?" The CEO didn't answer. He looked like he wanted to crawl into the camera and unplug the server from inside. Someone unmuted from legal. "We're reviewing those disbursements now." You won't be reviewing anything, Martin snapped. We'll be appointing our own audit partner. This is now a governance-level breach with exposure to shareholder litigation. Then came the final cut. Martin turned to me, his tone switching like a scalpel from threat to interest. Would you be willing to advise us on the internal framework you helped construct? Off record, of course. I gave him the same expression I gave Blake when he sat in my chair. Calm. Still. Empty of emotion. I'll consider it, I said. Then ended my screen share and muted myself. Let them twist. Let them run their panicked back-channel meetings. I had no interest in patching their leaks. I was there for one reason. To show the gun, not to fire it. Yet. And now they'd seen the bullet they'd been pretending didn't exist. The only question left was whether they'd try to claw their way out. Or pay their way through. The audit team didn't even wait until Monday. By Friday afternoon, 5 of them were holed up in the East Conference wing with a printer the size of a car engine and a stack of flagged transactions thick enough to kill a small horse. External auditors, clean suits, no small talk, eyes that skin like X-rays. The kind of people who don't blink when a company's guts are laid out across a mahogany table. By 3:42 p.m., they had it. A tidy string of approvals, all digitally signed by B. Turner at company.ai. Dozens of discretionary fund authorizations, some for vendor exploration, others labeled vaguely as executive wellness initiatives. One of them was for a $27,000 retreat at a boutique resort in Tulum. The receipt? A series of identical room charges marked under Vision Alignment Therapy and Executive Energy Reset. It was a tequila tasting and a hot stone massage. No minutes. No agenda. Just indulgence, approved by a child playing king. The real problem wasn't the money. It was the authority, or lack thereof. None of Blake's approvals had legal standing. He wasn't authorized on any financial ledger. Not as a signer. Not as a proxy. Not even as an alternate. Which meant every one of those transactions fell under unauthorized expenditure, and worse, potential misrepresentation. That's felony-level exposure when you're playing with shareholder capital. Legal sat the board down. Told them plain. This could be interpreted as a breach of fiduciary oversight. Translation? If the wrong people asked the right questions, they wouldn't just lose their bonuses. They could lose their shirts, their board seats, and their reputations. The CFO asked if they could retroactively ratify the transactions. Jenna Collins, our head of legal, laughed so hard she actually wheezed. Retroactive ratification of an illegal approval chain? She said. You'd have a better shot explaining it to the SEC with finger puppets. Panic doesn't come all at once. It builds in layers, email chains titled urgent. Follow-up? Calendar invites that get rescheduled twice in the same hour? Executive assistants whispering behind locked doors. And in the middle of it all, Blake stormed in like it was his company getting violated. This is harassment, he barked, storming into legal's suite like it owed him something. You're all jealous because I actually do stuff. I'm calling my lawyers. He had the nerve, to walk into a full audit review in $700 sneakers, holding a protein shake and say, y'all can't handle new energy so you're manufacturing drama. I'll sue for hostile treatment. Ruth Delgado, still seated like an executioner waiting for the gallows to lower, didn't even raise her voice. You don't have standing, she said coolly. You're not an employee. You're not an executive. You're not on payroll. You're not protected under company policy. If you want to sue, we'll need your current mailing address. Preferably somewhere with extradition. Blake blinked. Just once. Then doubled down. I'll go public, he said. Everyone loves a whistleblower story. That was when I finally spoke. Across the room. Calm. No smile. Just precision. You'd have to be inside the organization to blow a whistle, Blake. Right now, you're just trespassing. The room froze. Even Jenna didn't breathe. Blake looked at me like I'd slapped him. Maybe I had verbally. But the truth hit harder than any insult. He wasn't real. He'd never been real. He'd been a placeholder in his father's delusion. And now the paper trail had ended, with his name, his emails, his approvals, and no legal tether to back them up. He stormed out. probably to record a TikTok about how the deep state had come for his vibe shift. The board didn't follow. They stayed silent, grim, because Blake wasn't the one on the hook anymore. They were. And the noose was tightening. The board call hit my phone at 11:47 p.m. sharp. Not an email. Not a scheduling assistant. The chairman himself, Harold Briggs, voice like gravel soaked in regret. He didn't even bother with pleasantries. Just said, "We need to talk." The background was dead quiet. That's how I knew he wasn't in his office. He was home. Lights probably off. Tie undone. Sitting in a kitchen that smelled like panic and bourbon. I let him stew in the silence a few seconds longer than necessary. Then I answered, "I'm listening." He started with the kind of corporate humility you only hear when the ice has already cracked beneath their feet. Said the board had met privately. Said they were moving forward with Blake's full separation. Said the CEO was stepping back for reflection. Said a lot of things that sounded like resolutions but felt more like salvaged press releases waiting to happen. Then he dropped the real reason for the call. "We're prepared to offer you a return package," he said, "to help us through the next phase." Quietly. Internally. No litigation. The word litigation hovered like a threat with its fangs pulled. I waited. "We'd ask that you waive the penalty clause," he added, "in exchange for full operational control through restructuring, reporting only to the board. We'd compensate generously." Ah, there it was. The final Hail Mary. They were ready to put me back in, but only if I agreed to bury the breach. They wanted my silence, my shield, my skill, without paying the cost of what they'd done, without admitting the body count. "No," I said flatly. "I'm not waiving anything." Briggs sighed. Long shaky. "Come on, you've made your point." "I didn't make the point," I cut in. "Your son did. Your board ignored it. And your signature sealed it." I could hear him shifting in his chair, trying to pivot to steer. But I was already opening the file on my desktop. A one-page document I'd written hours earlier. Just in case. "I'm sending you something now," I said. Subject line. Restorative resolution, per Clause 7 enforcement. He went silent as the notification dinged on his end. I pictured him opening it with trembling fingers. Reading the bold header. Clause 7 enforcement terms non-negotiable. Below it, full execution of the $24.8 million breach fee, as defined by the original agreement. Immediate reinstatement of transitional executive privileges, with unrestricted operational authority, during the next 12-month stabilization period. Right to appoint a successor of my choosing, whose authority cannot be revoked without my written consent. Public statement acknowledging administrative error and affirming the integrity of transitional governance protections. No NDAs. No waivers. No confidentiality agreements. I will speak freely if questioned by regulatory, investor, or press inquiries. Briggs cleared his throat. "This is severe." "It's legal," I replied. "It's enforceable. And after what your son did to this company, it's a bargain." He didn't argue. Couldn't. The contract was airtight. Every violation had been documented. Every clause had teeth. And I had every signature I needed to watch them gnaw through his legacy. He whispered something then. Quiet. Like he was confessing to a priest. "I didn't think it would spiral this fast." "It didn't spiral," I said. "You lit it." He danced in it. "I just turned on the lights." The call ended without a goodbye. I sat there for a moment, staring at my screen. The clause. The signature. The timestamp. Then I clicked send to all board members. Not out of revenge. Out of principle. They tried to replace me with nepotism dressed as innovation. Now they'd pay to restore what they never understood. The room was full before the second hand hit 12. Emergency shareholder meeting. Not virtual this time, in person. That alone told you the temperature had dropped below containable. Suits lined the perimeter like trench warfare. The board flanked by legal on one side, risk on the other. Investors had flown in. Phones were off. Eyes were locked. No muffins. No caterpillasantries. Just cold water and colder consequences. I didn't sit at the main table. They offered. I declined. The CEO, red-eyed, visibly aged, stood at the center like a man rehearsing a fall he swore would never come. His tie was straight, his voice brittle. In light of recent developments, he began, and with full respect for the integrity of our governance framework. He paused. I am formally resigning as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. No applause. Just pens moving. Some shareholder reps nodded. One woman in a forest green suit leaned into her mic and said, "So noted." Then the real moment arrived. Two security staff, plainclothes quiet, stepped to the side doors and opened them. Blake, still wearing that same smug hoodie like it was armor, swaggered in like he was at a release party. His smile faltered when he saw the silence. The empty chair. The badge printer deactivated. The lack of anyone on his side. "Wait, what is this?" he asked, glancing around like he'd walked into the wrong meeting. The board chair didn't even look up. "Per audit recommendation and structural compliance enforcement, your access has been revoked." Security flanked him. Not rough, just firm. He tried to pull his phone. One of them calmly guided his hand down. "This is illegal," he muttered. "This is harassment." The chair turned a page. "You were never legally appointed. You were never on board. You were never insured under executive protections. You entered secure systems under false title. Your email will be archived and reviewed for compliance violations. This is not harassment, Mr. Turner. This is consequence." He was walked out without another word. Then the papers came to me. No spotlight. No grand declaration. Just Jenna, eyes level, voice neutral. "If you're ready." I nodded. The first document restored my title. Not because I wanted it, but because the structure demanded it to complete the loop. The second verified operational authority for the next 12 months. The third was procedural. Confirmation of compliance reactivation. Succession rights. And finally, the payout execution ledger. I signed. 1. By. 1. No flerisc. No commentary. Just signature. Initial. Date. And when it was done, I stood. I didn't wait for permission. I didn't ask for approval. I walked the same hallway Blake had posted that selfie from. The one where he joked he was finally running this place. I reached the office. My office. The door creaked open the same way it always had. The light clicked on. The air smelled like pine and electricity. The nameplate still hung by the door. My name never touched. I stepped inside. Sat down. Keyboard. Aligned. Chair. Centered. Desk. Untouched. I opened the admin console and navigated to system access. The screen blinked. Then I began typing names. Adding some. Removing others. Restoring order. Not for revenge. For function. For continuity. For every silent clause they ignored until it screamed. Then I leaned back, looked out the window at a city that hadn't paused for any of this, and whispered to no one in particular. Clause 7 was clear. I was never yours to replace.